Hey guys, hope you guys can hear me okay now. But welcome to Defcon at Devcon, a tabletop experience. Today we're going to go through the harrowing experience altogether of what happens when your protocol gets wrecked. Now today, my name's Heidi and I'm joined here by Peter, my colleague. We both work at Coinbase on the Unit 0x team. Now, let's set the stage a little bit. Over $620 million have already been stolen this year from almost 300 different projects. The average time to steal funds is only 15 minutes, but the average time to react is usually at least an hour. Now, there have been about 27 or so instances, which were great, where white hats were able to rescue about $150 million. And you too can also save millions of dollars by practicing incident response in a very safe and controlled environment today here with us. So I'm going to go and hand off the discussion to Peter, where he's going to be talking about the tabletop setup.
Cool. Thanks, Heidi. So one thing that we found that really helps folks to deal with incidents is to practice. Practice not just when you have a real live one, when you're freaking out and waking up at 2 in the morning, but in a controlled, safe environment where you can actually take lessons and build things without wrecking your whole protocol. So what we do at Coinbase is we run tabletop exercises all the time where we think of a really scary scenario and we practice that scenario in a very controlled, simulated environment. So tabletops. So the goals for today. One, we want to practice incident response handling. How many of you have participated on a live or maybe simulated incident response exercise? Not all of you. That's a good thing. That means you didn't have to go through the worst of the worst thing that your protocol can go through. But I encourage you to take notes, what we're about to do today, and bring it back home and do the same thing again and again with your project. The other thing that we want to do today is we want to educate you. We want to educate you about some of the threats and exploitation tactics, which are most, like this, I don't want to give you any spoilers, but the scenario that we picked out for you today, the thing that we're going to practice, is something that will most likely hit your protocol and most likely be damaging enough to pose an existential risk to you. Like the way that we designed it is something which is very portable. We're not bringing like large infrastructure or things. You can literally just, after you come back home, schedule some time with your teams and say, hey, let's Heidi and Peter, they taught us how to do those things. Let's run a quick thing. Like, this is what worries me the most. Like, we upgraded a contract, or we deployed a new dApp, or we have some cool cloud thing that we just signed up for. Let's practice. What happens if that gets hacked? Participation is not only encouraged, it's required. So we're going to use Slido. We're going to give you questions, things to discuss. You can team up if you want to. But we're looking for your live responses. We'll give you time so you can brainstorm how you would respond to different things that we're going to throw at you. We're going to throw a lot at you. Suspension of disbelief, we're practicing. This is all simulated. So we may give you like certain scenarios which may think like, oh, that would never happen to me in real life. Well, most likely it will, but suspend your disbelief sometimes. It won't be perfect, but the key is we will learn. And the key thing, I want you to bring home this like feeling of if something really nasty happens to me, at least I kind of played with it once. So I'm going to breathe in and do what needs to be done. Okay, so terms. Injects, artifacts, discussion. So injects are things that we will provide. So, we'll inject something, some event that just happened. Throughout each inject, you may ask us questions. Those are the artifacts. So you can ask me like, hey, Heidi, if I was to look at that EOA address, do I see any interesting labels on Etherscan? Or if I talk to person X, we can even do like a real role play. Maybe you can talk to one of your devs. So we can play those games together so you can ask for facts and we will provide those facts to you. And at last, discussion, so this is where the Slido comes in. We will go back and forth based on what questions you insert through Slido, and we'll discuss them together. Okay, so logistics. So we are the facilitators. We will provide the injections, and if we see that within your Slido answers, you're kind of going down the deep rabbit hole, like is this like something really outrageous, we will, call it out and redirect you to something more reasonable. We'll give you a break. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll give you around 11. We'll give you a 5-minute break. And then after the exercise is complete, we're going to sit down and talk through what actually happened, and all the things, all the lessons, that how we would approach it, and how we would love for you to, what takeaways we would like for you to go there. One more thing, which is pretty cool. For every inject that we provide, we will also give you a case study. Everything that we're giving you today is based on a real life compromise. So we will give you an inject, something happened, and then we're going to give you a project which was hacked in this exact way, and then we're going to compare and contrast how this project reacted and how you reacted, and then how we would react. So we'll learn together. Before we jump in, make sure that you can scan this QR code, and you can...
Or go to Slido.com and just type in that meeting number, and you will see that there's a drop-down of various different injects if you don't feel comfortable scanning QR codes.
Yeah, we'll give you a minute or two to make sure that you're all logged in.
To be clear, that QR code you see on the side there for Meerkat, we are not going to be using today. So make sure you use Slido. The reason being is that A, Slido is a slightly more interactive, and B, we also wanted to encourage remote participation. So if anyone's watching this live stream right now, you too can join this Slido link and start asking questions or making statements.
How's everyone looking? You're able to log in? All right.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's begin then. So there's this really cool project out there. It's called Founder Mode DAO. And unsurprisingly, it actually was launched on the Mode L2 chain. It's got over 100 million TVL right now. In fact, actually, it's got almost 200 million TVL at the moment. And what's interesting about this project, it is that it involves the FUMO token, which is the governance token for the project. Now, what this project does is it invests in various nascent DeFi projects and requires them to create a token pairing with FUMO. So, unsurprisingly, about 80% of all projects on the Mode chain hold FUMO or some derivative thereof. And you are trying to look to join a new project, and guess what? You just were hired by this project. You're very excited. One of your contacts from Devcon back in Bogota in 2022 reaches out and is like, hey, we'd really love you to participate with us, and you are psyched. The team is fully remote, and it consists of only 5 people, but you guys are ready to go. And what's really nice about this project is you kind of know everyone. Everyone uses their real name. Everyone's very chatty and conversational. And you're really excited. You're at your computer. You just finished like day 5 of getting onboarded, and you're reading some of the developer docs, making sure you fully understand what's going on within the project, when suddenly...
Dun, dun. You wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, your phone is blowing up. Telegram, Signal, Discord, X, all your friends are messaging you that your project just got wrecked. Your team is panicking and begging you to sign off on a real quick protocol upgrade. What do you do? So if you could pull up your Slido, and if you have questions, put those in the Slido. Feedback, what would you investigate?
I mean, and look at those questions right there that we have to kind of prompt you. But yeah, you've got 2 minutes. We'll give you 2 minutes time to think of questions, responses, and then we'll talk through them. So I'm already seeing a lot of responses here, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to share the Slido here directly with you guys. I guess I can plug my laptop in. Maybe we want to do that. But I'm seeing lots of questions come in, and I'm sure when you're on your phones, you see them as well. Some people are asking, and it looks like it's being quite upvoted right now, is what happened here? I don't know, Peter. Do you know what happened here?
Well, the key thing is that the contract had faults in that contract, and it appears that the funds are flowing out of those vaults.
Someone also said, I'm going to call my mom and apologize to her for getting into crypto. I totally get that.
It seems that as folks are investigating a little bit more, it looks like the main contract holding all the vaults was recently upgraded. Keep putting in your question. I'm seeing start a war room.
My question for that person is how would you go about doing that? Who would you start a war room with? Your team, who's all asleep at 3 a.m.?
Is there a pause free function in the protocol? There used to be, but now that the protocol is upgraded, there is some unknown contract which is sitting in its place with no source code.
Someone's already asked, has the upgrade been audited? The response here is no. We don't have time for that. It's 3 a.m.
The upgrade does not appears to be expected in any way. You can update the resume, that's fine.
Yeah, we have some people rapidly trying to just get out of the space. Fair.
Let's try to share the screen. I think it'll be fun. Can we share, can we do
Can we do a screen share?
a screen share? Yeah, can we plug in the...
Can we plug in our laptops again? Sorry.
Sorry. I think it'll be fun to see
Yeah.
the outputs.
But someone asked War Room, and I know that I prompted them, like, saying, well, with who? Your team. I think just to provide some artifacts, you reach out to SEAL 911, which is a part of the Security Alliance, consists of various different people, many of whom are actually in the room, that are willing to help. And they're starting to look into it. But you don't want to yet spin up a full-blown investigation quite.
So what does the protocol consist of? So the artifact they inject is that it appears to be an unknown contract which is being called by an attacker, and after every single call, a new vault is being drained.
You're good. We've got a bit of a delay, but now we're going to be able to share. No signal. That's good.
Okay, there you go.
They drained the vaults.
Could you please repeat the last response?
Yes, so following the upgrade, you're observing on-chain a whole series of transactions, and after every transaction appears to be large amounts of funds are being drained from the vault previously controlled by that contract.
Someone also said roll back first, analyze after. What do you mean by roll back? Roll back the chain? Roll back the contract? Okay. But funds are already drained. You're not recouping those funds.
There used to be an emergency pause in the original contract, but since it was upgraded, it's unclear what functionality is in the contract. How would you approach that? Oh, let's get a mic. So
yeah, you need a mic.
I'm actually a little bit confused about the cause of the hack. Are you saying that it was the protocol was upgraded to an implementation and there's no source code?
Correct.
And who performed that upgrade? Was it the protocol?
That's a good question. How would you figure that out?
Oh, okay. So it wasn't the team that performed that upgrade and caused it themselves.
You might want to ask.
Let's figure this out. Okay, that's a good question. Let's follow this chain of thought. Like, what questions and who would you ask?
Is there a CTO?
No,
There's
everyone's the CTO.
Yeah.
There are 5 people. There's a CTO.
Did the upgrade happen at 3 a.m. and then the hacks happened right afterwards?
It appears that the upgrade happened shortly before the drainage started.
The drainage started. So we could ask everyone on the team in the war room if anyone knows anything about the upgrade first, and then check the on-chain transactions to see like what kind of governance system implemented that upgrade, if any. If there's like a multi-sig, we could start looking into that.
So interestingly enough, the upgrade was performed by a private key that was used by the original deployer.
Okay, and the team members all deny performing this upgrade themselves?
There are only 4 team members on this war room call.
Right, okay. So we can assume that the deployer key got compromised by a hacker?
Potentially.
Possibly.
Possibly, okay. Yeah.
So you tried to get 5 people on the call, and so far you have 4. Let's say it's 4 a.m. You're still trying to reach out to people.
This other dev's a little flaky, so you don't know.
A little flaky.
So the missing guy is probably a suspect. He's not on the call. And you don't know if they shared the deploy private key, maybe one of them has access. It could be an insider one or it could be a private key.
Yeah, right now we don't know a lot. The SEAL team is investigating that along with the project team in the war room at the moment. I think we're going to pause this conversation here to actually go over some real world case studies. And I think since I'm sharing my screen, it's going to be pretty nice.
Perfect. Oh yeah. Okay, so before we dive into next steps, we just want to step back and look at just real world, very recent, real world scenario we're talking about, end of September, of how similar protocols react to that kind of 3 a.m. phone call. So the case study we're going to use is Shesmu. So the initial detection that someone reached out to the protocol saying that, well, how the protocol even found out there is an issue was the classic tweet. Someone tweeted at them saying that there is an issue. So this is at 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. It took the protocol just 20-something minutes to make an announcement to triage this. So before that, like the actual hack that was happening, so this is the kill chain. The hack itself happened at 7:20. So it took a whole hour for someone out there to detect that there was an issue and reach out to the protocol. The exploit itself was deployed 1918, 1921, the exploit was deployed. The first transaction started happening at 7:30 p.m. and 5 minutes later, the attacker already started swapping funds. So this is a typical timeline. When you get the initial call like that, every single minute counts. So when we eventually arrived, the right question was asked, like, hey, like, who made that upgrade? Where is that coming from? Can we upgrade the protocol again to save it? Like, those type of things need to be in your playbook. They need to be in your kind of like, known things to do ahead of time. So you can shave off those minutes. So those 5 minutes before the attacker, so the 2 exploit transactions that were executed, usually attackers don't drain everything all in the same go. So you have just a little bit of time, literal minutes, that you can minimize the losses. So it's just one case study. So in terms of response, for this hack in particular, An hour later, someone detected it. Half an hour later, there was an announcement. And then a day later, the pools were paused. So someone asked, like, can we pause the pools right away? Rajiv, I think it was you. That question was asked and responded to almost a day later. So just some things to absorb. Know what you need to do, including mitigating actions like pausing pools or doing an emergency upgrade or something like that ahead of time.
Now, one of you guys also already mentioned this, but there are some online sleuths out there. We're already starting to look into the actual exploit transactions, and an online sleuth, Zach, actually points out that one of the funding addresses of the attacker has an ENS name with the same Telegram handle as a recently hired contractor of the project. Now, what are our immediate security concerns here? How should we investigate this situation now? And how can we respond internally or externally now that we know that there might be some insider things going down? I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to write your questions in Slido. And the way you're going to go about doing that within Slido is actually go up to the top and just flip over to Inject 2 and start writing any kind of questions you have. We'll try to answer them real time, but someone's asked what access/permissions the contractor had. Can we revoke those? Yes, we can to an extent. Unfortunately, founder mode, we let everyone set up their environments using their personal laptops. So we can only revoke access keys that we know about in the cloud. Otherwise, though, we can't really revoke much access. What's the contractor's role? Someone asked. The contractor's role was as a developer. They were testing out upgrading some of the pool contracts so that we could have better, better and more rapid transactions flow.
It was one of your devs.
Has that dev ever said anything negative about Kim Jong-un? No. No, he hasn't. But you know what? We didn't apply the test of like, hey, can you please say that our dear fearless leader is terrible? No, we didn't do that here in the project team, unfortunately. I mean, you could try to contact him, and that's actually what you do. You're like, hey, I want you to write me on Slack immediately, fuck Kim Jong-un. He does not respond, though. He has not, by the way, responded to any messages. That's on Telegram, on X, on his phone, and nowhere. He's like gone. Does this contractor have access to other protocol contracts? Interestingly enough, this contractor was involved initially with the development of Founder Mode. He just didn't think he could commit full time to the project. Is he dead? I don't know. Someone's got to check on him.
So in terms of actions, so feel free to ask for artifacts, like what's going on, but what are your steps? What are you working on right now as an incident responder?
And let's flip back to those questions to kind of help guide us, right? What are our immediate security concerns? Some of you guys asked like, hey, does this guy still have access to any kind of privileged roles? Yes, he did. And let's say you start revoking them all immediately. There's another question here of how can we respond internally and externally? We'll let you guys sit with that one, especially externally. It's one that project teams think less about, but is critical.
Yep, rotating deployer account quickly. So that's one action. So on the proxy contract, you are trying to rotate to new keys, okay?
That's a great idea.
Where are the exploited funds going?
Well, currently the exploited funds are just sitting in an EOA belonging to the exploiter. But that's a good question. We're concerned about them moving along.
What piece of code does he actually inject into the protocol? So when you go to Etherscan and you try to see like what is the code, it just looks like a large binary blob. That's all the data that you have. Like what's any, like what would you do with that?
What would you guys do with that?
There's no nice Solidity code uploaded to Etherscan. Attacker was not nice enough to do that.
Someone asked, where's the onboarding guide? Use that guide for access revocation. I'm sorry, this project just spun up a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, sure, it's taken over mode, but we don't have an onboarding guide here. We are the onboarding guide as the team.
Hire hitmen, okay. It's a good
So
way to start
someone already
international
thought he
war.
was dead. Someone decided we needed to hire a hitman. It's getting a little wild here. Have we tried decompiling? That's a great idea.
Thank you. So you try to decompile the contract, and the one function, it's all kind of scrambled, but the one function that stands out was the one that was used to drain vaults. It appears to be very simple token transfer functionality that links to the attacker's address. There's proper access controls in place, so only the attacker can call it. And all it does, it takes the token address that the attacker wants to transfer and just simply drains whatever's in the contract. So it's very simple. You're also seeing other, I guess, functions within that decompiled piece of code. So when you can also specify, it looks like the token address to drain and the amount, and also the token address, some kind of like owner address, and also the amount. So you have two functions in there which appear to be non-standard.
Some people said, take down any external sites where users might add funds to pools and issue a warning not to interact with any contracts. That's a great idea. Hopefully, the team is talking about this in the war room and is issuing tweets and reaching out immediately to these websites because, as you guys remember, this project, sure, it has a high TVL, but it impacts most other projects on the mode chain. So effectively, this whole incident could make mode chain entirely toxic, which is not what anyone wants.
So that's something that we haven't heard the room do, and oftentimes we see projects also forgetting that. They're so busy with handling the incident, they forget to do the comms. And it's very important to tell users, tell other projects what is going on, what is the impact, and potentially if it's a systemic issue, to give them a heads up. Like maybe we're dealing with yet another compiler bug, right? Where not just your project is affected, but everyone is affected. Or there's like a mass phishing campaign where not only your project was hit, but others. So it's very important for the sake of the ecosystem to communicate there's an issue.
Someone else said, pause the protocol as a safety measure, tweet about it, assuring user funds are safe, investigations ongoing. This is exactly to Peter's point. Messaging out to users up front, even though you don't exactly know what's going on, is critical. It provides that trust for users to potentially still come back to you even if you do end up being wrecked. Time and time again, a lot of protocols are not exactly explicit and forthright about what exactly is going on, and that destroys trust within you and your users.
This situation doesn't actually use that funds are safe. Restore trust is critical.
What you might do in this sense, and it's worth asking, is what funds are not safe here? Are there still treasury funds? And if there are treasury funds, then you can say, hey, we have treasury funds, funds are safe in one way or another, we can help reestablish. So that would be one way to do it. Another person said, contact exchanges, bridges to see if we can stop the funds from being withdrawn. That's a really good question, especially because right now the funds haven't yet moved from this one EOA. But once they do start moving, they're going to immediately attempt to flow out of mode chain. Why? As I just mentioned, that entire chain is going to become very toxic soon. Mainly, this attacker has withdrawn mode-related tokens, right? And so these mode tokens aren't useful on any other chain. You want to get out of there if you're an attacker as soon as humanly possible. And so you're going to bridge over those funds. So bridges are at most risk, as well as any centralized entity that is interacting with this specific founder mode token. I think we're going to move on to a case study, actually, just because in the essence of time, because we have a lot of different injects to talk about here today. But, well, if it loads. We're going to talk about a very recent case study. In fact, actually, this slide is way out of date because, as many of you guys know, Delta Prime was not just hacked on September 15th, but also just a couple of days ago, again. And on September 15th, though, it was hacked due to a compromised admin key. We don't have to go into all of the different details of it, but it was because the admin key was compromised. And interestingly enough, there are quite a number of concerns, there are quite a number of concerns about Delta Prime and how they were managing their contractor base. In particular, if you do a little bit of on-chain sleuthing, as many people have already done, you can find that there are relations to several unsavory actors out there who've been paid directly by the Treasury to do some contract testing for the protocol. And these guys have been involved in lots of other really interesting exploits in the past, which date back all the way even to like the Yam Finance exploit in DeFi summer of 2020. That links back to one of the contractors that these guys hired. So I'm not going to go into all the details on that one, but happy to chat offline about the Delta Prime situation. But various different unsavory characters have been involved there, and they've been alerted of this in the past. If you are a protocol and you do get alerted of this, make sure you take it seriously. Dig in, assess whether or not you think the risk is worth the potential reward of having hired this contractor. Yeah, and uh-oh, there's another exploit.
Just as you were thinking that you'd made the comms, looks like the attacker's done, just holding all the funds. At this point, they drained the entire protocol. Now you get another alert. Users on the mode chain are reaching out, saying that their wallets are now being drained. So not the funds stored in the vulnerable protocol itself, but the money is moving from their very own wallets. And as you start interviewing all those users which were compromised, or sorry, are losing funds, the only common thing is that at one point or another they interacted with the founder mode contract. What could be causing these wallet drains? How should we respond to protect users? And what is the overall impact to the protocol ecosystem?
We're going to give you 2 minutes to ask questions. Yes. So for those of you that didn't hear this, revoke approvals immediately. How do you do that across a decentralized community of individuals? Sorry, I'll go back. Awesome. I'm going to start reading some questions here. So it looks like someone also said infinite approvals. Can we easily revoke all approvals? That would be really scary if we could. I'd be concerned about there being additional attack vectors if that were the case. So that is no, we cannot.
Should we try to upgrade that contract?
To a null address, something like null code.
Okay, so we upgrade the contract to basically overwrite attackers, whatever malicious code. Okay, that's one approach, if that's possible, yeah.
I just have a general question, like before this even happens, we communicated externally. In this situation, would you recommend preemptively for users to revoke all their approvals against the protocol as part of that?
Almost like a standard action. I mean, there are multiple stages of the incident response. Like one stage is the triage and then the root cause analysis. So it's very critical to perform root cause analysis before jumping into like mitigations and comms and all that to understand what happened, what's affected, and how big is the blast radius. So you may accidentally advise users to take actions. If it's just for safety, that's fine. What I'm more worried about, you force people to do actions which may be more damaging because you don't have a chance to fully understand what is the root cause. I'm trying to think of a scenario. So if there is a compromise and they start interacting with a token or protocol, revoking approvals, and by making that approval, they somehow are triggering the code they shouldn't. We could have a mass, attackers don't listen to this, but point is, if the approval itself is getting backdoored and all the users are calling it on the compromised token, now you're pwning the whole ecosystem.
That's a good point.
Extreme example, but the point is root cause analysis and understanding is very important. There's also like the panic thing, like what we're seeing is, there was actually Immunify recently published an article about like what is the true impact of a token compromise. And we usually focus on like, hey, Project X was compromised and they stole $5 million or whatever. But the secondary effects are oftentimes 10x, if not more, the initial impact. So we have token prices which are dropping to zero, the value is dropping. Then you have secondary ecosystem, the people are getting wrecked if they're loaning something, if they're getting liquidated. So very important to be very careful what is it that we advise to users and externally after we fully understand what exactly happened.
Actually, on that note, Peter, I was just thinking about, I forgot if it was in 2022 or 2023, but wasn't revoke cash overtaken at one point or another? And so if you're tweeting out, hey, use revoke.cash to revoke all approvals, if an exploiter has taken over a website like that, you're donezo, right? Now your users will never trust you again. And that would actually be one of my bigger concerns as opposed to some, little smart contract thing. But someone wrote on here, why don't you tweet to revoke all token approvals with the FUMO contracts? That's one thing you could do, but as Peter mentioned, again, understanding the landscape is extremely important. But messaging to users is also important. So we don't want to forget to message to them saying that we're looking into it, we're investigating. But you might not want to say, hey, revoke all token approvals until you've actually done analysis.
Yep. So far we got a couple good points. If the attacker was nice enough not to change the administrative account and the proxy, upgrade it to something non-malicious, comms, revoke approvals, anything else that you folks would jump in on.
Okay. Which token got drained?
ERC20s, doesn't matter.
So if it is like proprietary token of the FUMO contract, then we can just like remove the liquidity from all the DEX and like we will tell all the centralized exchange like this is a blacklisted token. So at least that hacker or the threat actor can't get out its fund.
We can do that for FUMO, but the problem is because there were so many pairs, right? You know how we talked about how the FUMO governance tokens works? You can maybe do it for FUMO, but all the other tokens out there are screwed, right? All the other users that hold those. Someone asked here, what wallets did they use? They used all sorts of different wallets. MetaMask, Coinbase wallet, Privy, doesn't matter. Unfortunately, they all got wrecked. So this is not a situation of like a slope wallet here, but good question. And someone asked here, what does a sample transaction drain looks like? Well, they're calling to a contract, and you can see here, suddenly there are a whole bunch of transfers then. Looks like over 100 transfers take place in one transaction alone, all just transferring ERC20s from whatever EOA it was that had done the approval to the particular exploiter.
Remember when you were decompiling and there was this unusual method which was taking a token address, amount, and also and I guess an owner EOA address? It looks like the attacker is calling just that. So they were not only greedy enough to steal money from the protocol, no, they came after users as well.
So someone has the cool idea, kind of like you, where it was snapshot the balance before attack and try to migrate the FUMO token or FUMO contract / token into a new one. Great idea, but only good for poor FUMO and not everything else. And unfortunately, as we know, FUMO is an ecosystem token. If the ecosystem's wrecked, it doesn't matter if FUMO exists or not. Someone also asked, hey, can we get wallet providers to show warnings about approval revocation? Yes, that's possible. So you're in the SEAL 911 team who can hook you up with MetaMask and with a couple other wallet providers, and they're happy to help, and they're happy to provide sort of that warning sign. But as you see on chain, you see at least 10 of these transactions going down as you're trying to reach out and get contact with MetaMask.
And that's something, someone mentioned it here, but we should continue pushing on the ecosystem. If you recall, this is the ecosystem-wide token. We should be in the war room talking to all the other projects right now, pausing their protocols, because it's not enough that we are compromised, the FUMO token is compromised. All these other liquidity provider pairs, and they're about to get wrecked as well. They're about to get drained because someone has these mass amounts of FUMO token, and they will use it because they need liquidity to get out of the chain.
A lot of other questions. Though there's one question about, did Ledger NPM package get compromised again? I don't know. Do we want to research that? Maybe we get a researcher in SEAL 9.1 to take a look at it, and they find, no, I don't think this is the Ledger NPM package. It doesn't look like it. This does not look like that particular compromise at all.
That developer, the fifth developer is still not online, by the way. You still can't reach them.
Yeah, we're not sure. Dead, Hitman, what were the other ideas that happened to this guy? Food poisoning? I don't know. Someone asked, can white hats recover funds from the user using this approve-related method? Are there legal concerns with this?
Well, unfortunately, the attacker was nasty enough to change the admin owner of the original compromised contract, so you cannot just upgrade it as easily. So white hat action is not possible. But what action would you take? Like, is there anything that, if there's a chain-wide hack, like any other creative things that you could take?
So we're already messaging out to wallets and asking wallets, can you please, please, please throw up a warning sign, revoke approvals. We're already sending out tweets saying, hey, revoke approvals, not using a revoke.cash link or anything like that, because we're too paranoid. Is there anything else we can do?
Was that fifth employee working remote or where?
Can you repeat that?
So the one guy is still missing on the call, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk to the local police to their living area.
Yes, and of course you know this person's true name, right? And the previous inject we also learned about his ENS handle. We can do a little bit more due diligence on that front. In SEAL 911, you also have some online sleuths that are trying to figure out where he lives. However, our project is entirely decentralized. We love that. We pay everyone in FUMO, right? We don't know exactly where this dude lives, unfortunately. We do have his logs, though, and unfortunately his logs point to him using Molvad VPN, and so we're not exactly sure of his location. And Molvad is a little notorious for not necessarily providing us the details we want, but we can do a little bit more digging. Again, we're a startup with 5 people.
Okay, I'm seeing a note, hard fork the chain. Here we go. Whoever asked that question, could you get the mic, please, and let's discuss this a little bit.
Or they might be remote.
Or they might be remote. Well, on a high level, so we've seen, I'm trying to count the number of times that full chains halted or hard forked. So we have the Blast that comes to mind. We have Linea. We have the good old BSC when the bridge got BSC token hub was hacked a few years ago. So it's not an unheard of thing to do, to hold the entire chain when a major protocol is hacked. So how would that even look like? Just to you know, what we're doing this here is like we're simulating scenarios. So if you are arriving at a point where, you know, as Heidi mentioned, this is half of TVL of
over
a given
half,
chain,
right?
over half, okay, over half of TVL of a given chain, L2 chain, got compromised. Is it unheard of to reach out to the chain owner, like provider, and start a discussion to halt it? Or maybe like, what are the in-between actions like?
Would we call Mode into the war room and beg them and tell them your project's dead in the water? Your chain is
Help.
effectively toxic. I want to say Phantom had that problem, right? Phantom hasn't really come back from the grave since the multi-chain exploit. It's effectively become a toxic chain, right? So maybe you could dangle that and say, hey, Mo, you don't want to become another Phantom. You know, please come help us. But is there any other precedent for that? I don't know. But we can certainly talk to them and maybe try to get some lawyers in the room. Again, we're a bunch of devs. We're only 4 people now. We don't have lawyers yet, but we're still talking to SEAL 911 and trying to work that through with them.
So one thing to keep in mind, when you're even talking about like, you know, nuclear options, this is a nuclear option. It's because it breaks the fundamental assumption of decentralization for what is it that we do here. If a single entity can decide to take actions like that, that's you better, you know, I mean, we're Ethereum, like this is Ethereum conference, like we've been through this before. So the question you need to answer is where and how exactly you're going to do that. So you have a variety of points. You can like the linear approach or blast approach, you can, you know, block list malicious addresses on the sequencer side. You can approach it on the bridge side, on the mainnet side. You can potentially start looking for outbounds and start, you know, paying attention, maybe block them there. Where else would you put some kind of stoppage, or like what are your thoughts? Like, go ahead. Maybe you can get a mic or.
Could we ask for a recap of what's worked so far? Because we've thrown a whole bunch of things on the wall. What were we actually able to accomplish in the last 40 minutes?
So far, on this last scenario, the vaults are drained. Before we had a chance to war room and get everyone in, attackers, as I showed you with the one sample exploit, attackers need 5 minutes to do their thing. So attackers currently holding all the funds in their EOA. The funds are not moving yet. Following that, internal investigation showed that it's potentially someone who has access to private keys, the deployer private keys. And the last piece, the attacker is currently actively draining all the users that ever interacted with this protocol and collecting those funds as well. So funds are still not moving out of that EOA, but we are still in the war room kind of like deciding what are we doing next. We were unable to pause the contract because the core functionality of the contract changed. It's now a contract which is fully controlled by the attacker. So that ship has sailed.
There's one other fact too, that your 5th dev, you're unable to reach out to them, right? And we know that they may or may not be associated with other illicit activity. Let's actually take a quick pause here and let's do a quick case study. I'm sure many of you already kind of assumed some of these case studies coming up here.
Sure. Okay, so the case study that we're basing this on is Radiant Capital. So Radiant Capital, if you look at the attacker right now on chain, so the initial hack was $53 million. And, you know, pretty fascinating attack all by itself. The 3 key signers of the protocol were not necessarily, let's say tricked. They were tricked by substituting a transaction that was on the way to their hardware wallets to make them sign something they did not intend to sign, which is an upgrade of a contract. Here's what's more interesting in this. Not only did attackers perform this upgrade to drain all the vaults, they did add the functionality, just like our attacker, to also drain the users. I have not seen this level of greed and also sophistication at the same time, that it's not enough for you to be $53 million richer. No, you continue the attack. And I looked at the attacker just a few days ago. They continue draining users even as we speak right now. So the second someone puts some money in their wallet, drained. So they have a script running which is just monitoring all those wallets that are approved to that contract, and they continue getting themselves more and more assets. So just a case study. So this is, again, every single inject is based on something that unfortunately happened in the real world you should be prepared for. So the takeaway here is just because your protocol just got compromised, it doesn't mean you're done. Not only is your protocol now lost funds, you have to start thinking, okay, what is, we discussed like you need to do the root cause analysis to fully understand the problem. You do need to quickly decompile the contract, look at what other interesting functionality there may be. Sometimes you get surprised, attackers don't put some kind of access controls, so you can white hat it. So you can take all those funds back. That happened before. Or at the same time, you need to immediately start warning your users and reaching out to your partner protocol saying, the first wave of the attack is done. We are about to get hit by the second wave, which is going to target our users as opposed to the protocol itself. So just another lesson learned.
So the TLDR of that is you shouldn't just be worried about your treasury, your pools. You also need to be worried about your users, right? Your core users are the reason why you even have your project to begin with. Cool. So we are now at halftime, basically. And I think it's a good time to go ahead and take a 5-minute break because it's been a lot. And we're going to come back in 5 minutes' time to continue.
Maybe we can give him so it's 10:51 right now. Let's come back at 11. And there's more.
There's always more.
There will be a resolution. Not necessarily happy. This is not Hollywood, so the story does not always end with us walking in the sunset.
We're going to try, though. on here. Okay, I think we're ready to begin after our lovely break. So, does anyone want to try their hand at a quick recap of what we talked about in the last hour? All the injects? Anyone? That's okay if you don't. The long and short of it is you're running founder mode, your project, right? It involves the FUMO token, and your project, as well as others with the derivative token, make up 80% of supply on the mode chain. It seems like your project got wrecked. All of the funds were withdrawn from various different pools for your token due to a malicious contract upgrade. You no longer have access, so it's not like you can try to take it back. And you know that one of your project team members is not responding to any emails, Slacks, phone calls, etc. They've just fully gone MIA. You also know that this particular employee or contractor, they seem a little bit suspect. And finally, you thought the worst of it was done. It wasn't, because suddenly users who had approved their tokens to all the pools that were drained are suddenly getting drained themselves. So you breathe a sigh of relief to an extent. All the pools are fully drained at this point. All the users appear to have been drained. Sure, some users can still send funds to their EOAs and those can get drained again, but you've messaged out, you've done all the comms that you can, you've talked with SEAL 911, you've set up a war room, you're in conversation with local law enforcement, you're in conversations with various different exchanges through SEAL 911. You think you're kind of done with the incident. You guys think that you can wind down the war room at this point. But unfortunately, this is usually when the real fun begins. Because, as we mentioned last time, the attacker was mainly just sending funds to one EOA alone. But in the middle of the night, they start swapping and moving funds over to various EVM chains. So there are a couple questions we have here. Can devs do something? What actions can we take? Who can help us stop this? And how do we warn everyone? So I'm going to go back to Slido here, and we're going to pivot over to Inject 4, where we're going to start that discussion. And now one of you guys actually asked earlier, how is it that we would maybe reach out to a centralized exchange to maybe stop the flow of funds? And I wanted to leave it actually to this point so we could talk about, how do we even reach out to centralized exchanges? My advice would actually be, if you are already in a war room with SEAL 911, they can usually get you in touch. So someone wrote immediately on here, stop bridges. So there are two different types of bridges here. There are bridges, right, like a canonical bridge, which usually has a 7-day lockup period of funds. So yeah, you could potentially, stop those bridge funds from moving over. But various different third-party bridges, right, those are going to be a little bit more tricky to stop. Now, some of you mentioned way back, hey, we should already be reaching out to bridges. Let's say you reach out to a couple of them and only one responds and is blocking the funds. That's great. You've only blocked, though, $20 million. $20 million's great, but as we mentioned before, we have $100 million at stake here, plus. Someone says, blacklist the address on token contracts like USDC. That's a great idea. Unfortunately, though, USDC here on the mode chain is not native, meaning that we're dealing with USDCE here, which is a bridged asset. There is no blacklister ability. Same with Tether. But that's a great idea. On chains where you can potentially have funds blacklisted like USDC and USDT, that is indeed possible. However, I would not rely on that. The process for getting funds blacklisted is usually slow and arduous, and you have to already have a contact with law enforcement established. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, the attacker is going to move out of those tokens immediately into tokens that cannot be blacklisted. So I wouldn't even bother necessarily. Someone says pray.
Great.
Pray Zach XPT finds the person behind this account.
Well, what would you look, I mean, it's great to rely on third parties, but like, what would your approach be to like, to figure out like what is the identity, like, do we know who is the attacker at this point?
Someone said, why don't we warn the MIA contractor, right? Remember, we had that contractor that was our 5th dev that isn't responding to us, that everyone is a suspect at this point, and there will be legal implications if laundering doesn't stop immediately. That is possible, but they're not responding to anything, right? They're not opening any of their messages. It doesn't even look like they've been on Telegram in the last 2 days since this incident. Some say, why don't we reach out to the attacker and and say that we won't pursue any legal action if they give us some of the funds back. We're going to hold on that. It seems like the team's back and forth as to whether or not we should indeed, reach out to them. We don't really feel comfortable. We've been talking a little bit with law enforcement. Even though some people on SEAL want to do that, we're just not exactly comfortable at this front doing that. But that's an interesting idea.
Well, going back to laundering, like what are we doing to see, well, one, to identify where are we going, where are the funds moving, and then potentially stopping or freezing them. So we had some token freezes, exchange outreach, anything else that we should be doing right now.
Is there anyone else you maybe want to reach out to? Some of you guys mentioned Zach XBT is a person to reach out to. There are a couple different online sleuths that you might want to reach out to. Your team at this point is going to be extremely tired if you're up for X number of hours trying to solve this in a war room. You're not going to have the ability to track down all funds. And you guys might be sitting there thinking, well, why do we even have to do that? Funds are gone. Well, law enforcement's not going to be capable enough to do that when you reach out to them. No matter if you reach out to them today or tomorrow, they're not going to be capable of doing that. So it's going to be in your best interest to understand where the funds are so that you can best explain how to potentially get them back if indeed that's even possible. There are a couple of different companies you could be reaching out to at this point. Zero Shadow is one of them that tracks funds and gets alerts. Another thing though too is you can start tracking the funds. There are several different services out there that are free, like Metasleuth, that you can actually set up alerts on various different addresses so that you can see, for example, like with this attacker, right? Let's say he sent funds only to one EOA. You could set an alert on that EOA if it ever sends funds out, right? Boom, then you're going to be aware. So there are a couple different services like that that you can already just out of the box get with having to sign any crazy contracts or doing anything.
Self-reliance is key. Like, it's definitely great to reach out to third parties and ask for help, but the reason why we're doing this exercise is to identify your gaps. So if you're sitting in the room and you're saying like, well, if I had to trace funds, I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. Well, why don't you go? It's a free project that you can use today. Go to Metasleuth. It's free of charge. Pick up any exploit. I think we have a case study coming up, so you can take out the case study, any of the case studies that we're discussing today, and just see if you can just trace the funds. Like where's the money flowing? Like what exchanges does it hit? What project? What bridges? What swaps they perform? Spend half an hour on that, so that 30 minutes that you're going to spend will mean the world if you have to do this under much more stressful scenarios where you have to like do this live, like, okay, where the money go? At least you know the tools, you know how to use them, and just it will give you some guidance of like who to reach out for help.
Someone has this cute comment in here. Why don't you interact with an OFAC-tainted smart contract or wallet so that all of the addresses for founder mode get blocked so they can't drain money anymore? That's cute, but I don't advise anyone doing that if they are working or interacting with users or platforms that are based within the US or Europe, generally speaking. I don't think that's a good idea. It's cute though.
A security research company that shall remain unnamed did do this for the sake of the experiment. It's not a good idea to do this. Let's stay. There's certain ethical things as a defender that you can and cannot do. So one of the things, and it's well established in traditional security and applies to our side as well, you can't do things like hacking back a protocol or targeting, interacting with something that you're not supposed to, like OFAC addresses and so on and so on. So it's don't stay on the right side of the law.
Actually, on the hacking back aspect, someone mentioned here, why don't we get founder mode to sign with the SEAL safe harbor? Yeah, certainly that can happen, but I mean, SEAL safe harbor is great, signing that beforehand would have been nice. Maybe there could have been some more prevention that could have happened, but that's potential. And for those of you that don't know what the safe harbor is, effectively your project signs a legal release, so to speak, saying that, hey, if I get hacked, and in this particular instance where a white hat sees the hack going down, they can actually hack those funds back and return them to this particular address that I have designated. Now, SEAL Safe Harbor is fantastic, but it works in very, very specific legal instances, so it's just one thing to keep in mind here.
And maybe, now that you are thinking about what happens if my protocol gets compromised, this will be the push that you need to sign up for something like this. So if we go back to the case study we covered earlier, the Shesmu hack, right? It was actually a success story because the majority of funds were returned. Well, first of all, the initial attacker returned the funds for a bounty. Let's call it a bounty, ransom bounty. But something amazing happened. The same protocol also had a weakness, a vulnerability, which was even more damaging than the original hack. And a white hat, explicitly white hat, found it, reached out that they performed the white hat attack, returned all of the funds. So engaging the community, signing up for something like Safe Harbor ahead of time so that people don't have like this moral dilemma, like, do I save all that money or do I risk going to jail if for some reason I don't have permission to? Maybe you can short circuit this thought process and sign up for the Safe Harbor so that if someone does want to help you, they're not afraid for their own safety and their legal repercussions of that.
There's some pretty funny comments in here. I just read one saying swat the contractor's address. Geez, like, we're going wild here. Some people said to hire a hitman. Some people said check if the contractor's dead. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I would say the top comment here is secure all access logs like Discord so that we can use it for future analysis. I highly recommend that. There are a couple other things you can do as well, and in the essence of time, because we do want to kind of do a post-mortem of this attack, I'm going to kind of move on with a particular case study that I kind of want to talk to you guys about with regard to laundering to help you guys think through it. Now, generally, when funds are stolen, 9 times out of 10 on an EVM chain, what attackers will do is they'll use some mix of mixers, bridges, coin swap services, and also sexes in order to launder funds. And interestingly enough, Tapioca Finance, which got hacked, what was it, last month? The attackers here, instead of using a mixing service, they primarily actually used bridges for obfuscation purposes. So as many of you guys know, Tornado Cash used to be the mainstay for attackers to just mix funds and for any anonymous developer to actually, anonymize the source of funds or destination of funds or whatever, right? Unfortunately, now that it's been OFAC'd though, it's basically persona non grata, and a lot of exploiters actually tend to use it. So you're effectively mixing dirty money with dirty money, and you're going to be getting dirty money out. And that's not great if you're an attacker. So they're trying to evolve a little bit here. So I'm going to go very, very quickly through the general flow of a theft. So usually a DApp will have whatever their native currency stolen. So in this case, it's the FUMO token, right? That FUMO token though, right, let's be real here, it's worthless to us because in theory, if mode finally reaches back out to us, right, as the founders of the company, maybe they'll halt the chain, right? Maybe there's something we can do here, right? So I want to get out of FUMO as fast as possible because if I dump that token, it's valueless. So usually those funds are bridged over to an EVM chain. From there, they're usually mixed through a mixer, and then it's one or the other. They either go through a coin swap or bridge, and usually this will happen a couple times over, but eventually those funds will go into Bitcoin. For whatever reason, I don't know, I think it's because in Bitcoin there's common spend. Wallets look a little bit more scary. Researchers decide to quit tracking through that, and so because of that, they send through mixers, and then they go back, bridge over to EVM chains, and they cash out at OTCs and sexes. I see this happen all the damn time. It's really annoying because Bitcoin basically basically halts a lot of people from tracing funds down the line, even though I would highly suggest spending some time in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and you'll see how easy it is to sometimes break some of these mixers. Now, sometimes they'll rinse and repeat some of this stuff to make it a little bit more complicated, but this is the long and short of it. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, right here at the beginning part, Tornado Cash is no longer super we don't want to use Tornado Cash because it's full of dirty money. There also aren't many privacy protocols. Even Railgun doesn't have the liquidity enough to obfuscate a lot of times attackers' funds. So what exactly are they doing now? In Tapioca's instance, what happened was they stole a whole bunch of money, some USDT, USDC, on Arbitrum, and what these guys did was they used a series of different bridges and just started bridging Tether over through all of these different bridges and chain hopping. And interestingly enough, some of these bridges are easier to trace through than others. So what these guys are doing is, I mean, you use a mixing service, right? You use a mixing service to obfuscate the source and destination of funds. You don't keep the money there as like a savings account, right, to like keep your dirty money forever. That is not the point. And especially for an attacker, you don't trust any service, right? So all these guys are doing is trying to buy time so that you, as the protocol, cannot trace through where the funds are so you can't stop them. So this is how they buy themselves time, and eventually, of course, they get into Bitcoin, and these attackers, their new way of doing it is through WanChain. New way. It's actually, we've seen this a couple of times. And from WanChain, they go to Wasabi Wallet, which is a mixing service, and from there, they go back to EVM, and the whole song and dance again, the same thing we see with USDC. Right? And this is just to kind of just give you guys a flavor of what you guys might see out in the wild if indeed you ever see a protocol getting wrecked or your own protocol getting wrecked. Okay.
So, yeah, so the name of the game is to stay just far ahead of researchers and investigators. They can move the funds safely to a centralized exchange so they can cash out. So whatever obfuscation techniques they can come up with, and it's especially like moving through bridges or swapping and all of that, the reason why they do this is that standard analytics tools, they don't have like proper parsers in place to very quickly identify, okay, the funds are, you have to look at the full like transaction call data, figure out like where are they sending the funds, and then for every single protocol you have to look up like, oh, it's the chain X means they're moving money to I don't know, Polygon or Avalanche or whatever. So it's massive pain in the ass to like go through the docs, figure out where the money's flowing, go to the other blockchain explorer, catch it on the other side, and you have to do this for every single protocol. So if you have an idea for a brand new killer analytics product, is build something that would have modules for every major protocol, for every major exchange, and so on, that traces through those things.
Actually, there are a couple of bridges out there right now, some of which that I mentioned in Tapioca, like Stargate, for example, uses layer 0, so you can go look up the transaction, the bridge transaction on layer scan. DLN has that as well. Across does not. But you know what would be a really killer app is bridging all of these different scans, bridge scans effectively together to make one big, I don't know, cross-hopping chain scan out there. Yeah, effectively though, you as a protocol need to be on top of what's possible and what's not. Attackers obviously like to, you know, be the first adopters for a reason, because some of these things are very difficult to understand. If you only have 2 minutes to really trace through, to figure out where the hell funds are going, especially if you're very hopeful that since these funds are in both USDC and USDT, that eventually they will hit Ethereum. And that's when the blacklister function can potentially be invoked. Well, you got to trace through that very rapidly because otherwise they're going to dump those funds and, you know, your one chance is gone. Okay. Yeah.
How do you continue after if they reach a centralized exchange?
Mm-hmm.
That essentially acts like a mixer.
Yes. So centralized entity.
Continue exploring after.
Yeah, so one person here said was centralized entities act a lot like mixers from the outsider's perspective. If you're working with a company or with SEAL 911, you could potentially collaborate with these centralized entities that will help you trace the funds on further. One thing I highly recommend too is when you're working with law enforcement, they can also more quickly get that information from whatever the centralized entity is so that you can continue tracing them on. Now there are ways to break these centralized entities, especially coin swap services. Now, for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about when I mean a coin swap service, it's a service, there are a ton of them on bestchange.ru that effectively allow you to swap like Bitcoin for ETH without providing any KYC details whatsoever. So it's very quick. Fixed float is one of them, Change Now, as you probably know, Changely, there are a bunch of them. But yeah, those are the ones that, that you can also reach out to as well in that instance.
Yeah, the time is not on your side. And then the attackers, depending how sophisticated is the attacker, they know exactly what they're doing and they're moving funds like every few minutes, like boom, 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 one after another. So not only do you have to know how to trace through those things, you have to be fast to go through all those different hops. But again, it depends on how sophisticated is the attacker. Like a lot of times if we're dealing with the, kind of like, if you've seen my talk, the lone wolves, the crypto natives who are not like full-on criminals that, laundering is their second nature, they will fumble those things because they don't know. We're preparing you for a professional money launderer who's been doing this for many, many years, and just to prepare you for the speed of tracing that you will need to perform.
And one other thing that I want to make clear here is they partition out funds into increments of 100,000. So they're not dealing with the full amount that was stolen. They usually don't. A lot of times attackers are quite lazy when they launder initially through Tornado Cash and they just like throw it all through and then they basically just withdraw using the exact same tactics over and over and over again. So it's very easy to detect.
What percentage of attackers would you say are professional like this and what percentage is like fumbling?
Oh, sorry.
I'll ask it again. What percentage of attackers would you say are professionals versus fumblers?
Half and half for what I've
Yeah.
seen.
Okay. So it still makes sense.
Yeah,
to prepare for the
50% chance that
professional.
you're going to hit a professional.
But
It also depends on the root cause.
yeah, I would also say though, in terms if we though translate this into volume, the professionals are getting a ton of volume, but the professionals that conduct the attack initially. The professionals who conduct the attack are not usually the launderers though in that case. And the launderers will screw up all the damn time. Like they'll mix funds through Tornado and then withdraw from Tornado to like an address they already used. Like, I mean, the amount of things that I've seen like that happen on both Bitcoin and Ethereum is wild. But yeah, they're not very great. They're contractors usually.
Cool. And you said it depends on the type of the attack. So is it going to be the nation state?
Right. If you're dealing with nation states, you're dealing with pros. If you're dealing with criminal gangs, you are dealing with pros. If you're dealing with, like the early example I used was the Chesmo, there was a lot of fumbling. There was like a lot of doxing. There was a EOA account that was used and reused many, many times. You can find all sorts of data if you want to dig more. Hence why it was so easy to reach out to the attacker and negotiate a return.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say nation states, it depends though, whether or not they fumble the laundering process. Laundering looks very different in a lot of nation states, DPRK in particular, fumbles laundering because they hire various different contractors out to conduct the laundering and like basically follow a flow, right? And sometimes the contractors screw up and you can basically see that then the manager's like, no, you're done here, like just send me the money. And then you're like,
Firing squad.
Yeah, like, I see what happened here. Cool, well,
Okay, speaking of dealing with attackers and the next steps, a common tactic that we're seeing that happens post the compromise is projects reaching out and talking to attackers, saying, hey, You know, can we negotiate? And such is the case with your team, as all of your friends and colleagues, they're increasingly getting panicked, and there's no way to get the funds back. They start begging you to reach out to the attacker. So the question for the room is, how would you do that? What would your message read? And what are you negotiating for? What are you hoping to get back? So feel free to throw answers.
And some of you guys already asked that question, like, hey, why don't we just negotiate with the attacker? So this question's
Let's
for
negotiate.
you. I love
Yeah,
these responses.
That's the swatting, the hitman. Yep.
We have some aggressive participants here
I
today.
know.
I do not want to get on your bad side. Call it aggro DAO instead. Some people are saying, hey, we're going to offer a bounty, maybe 5 to 10% of the amount. That's
5. I mean, is it 5 or 10? You kind of want to be precise about those things.
Have you guys ever taken a negotiation course? Yeah, only one of you guys. Highly recommend, if you're a dev and you're concerned about this ever, take a negotiations course. It will help you figure out exactly what you are willing to negotiate on. Because it's not just the funds that you're necessarily going to be negotiating on, right? You might be negotiating on getting access back to your contracts. They could have other things that you might want.
The ownership of your company. Director role.
Yeah, you get to be the director again.
Director. Inside joke, which we'll reveal in a second.
Yeah.
Ask them if they need a nap first. Yep, exactly. Naps are important before starting negotiations. Again, this is actual case study. It's not a joke. That actually happened.
Someone does like 5.88%. I have no idea where you got that from, but you know, seems like an interesting anchoring number to use.
Yep.
Someone wrote, threatening will not work for them. Exactly. Yeah, so that's why you want to negotiate, right? Offer 5% and expect them to accept for 10 to 20% and call it a lucky day. Someone has definitely dealt with negotiations before. This sometimes, and this oftentimes actually happens, but you don't want to necessarily lowball them either, because then they'll get offended, and then they might not even respond with you.
Well, it'd be great to see like full text if you want to throw it in the chat. Like, what would you actually send on chain? And then the assumption, I'm not seeing this mentioned, but the assumption is normally negotiations start on chain, where you put a literal ASCII text in a cold data and you send a transaction to the attacker with the message. So bad actors usually expect that to come through sooner or later. Or sometimes they will reach out to you and say like, hey, let's
talk.
Let's talk.
This has not happened in this case.
Not in this case, yeah.
Someone actually mentioned get a hold of the attacker and reach out to law enforcement at the same time. This is a really interesting one, actually, because usually we're assuming this here, but usually the negotiation is, hey, you give me bounty, I won't reach out to law enforcement or pursue anything. You do not have control of law enforcement. I don't care what you say. You have no control over law enforcement. So don't even bother, I would say, negotiating on that angle.
Binding. You can. Oh, sorry. You should say, because it's not legally binding. You can tell them that you won't press any charges, and then press as many charges as you want.
There's that. So interesting case study is the mango markets with the
yeah.
Avi Eisenberg, right? So there was, everyone familiar, mango markets, you know, a very profitable transaction. You know, following that very profitable transaction, there was negotiation where, you know, there's a little back and forth where Avi agreed to return the funds. In exchange, I forgot what the exact terms were. I think they wanted to cover whatever the loan was that he manipulated.
And not pressing charges.
And not pressing
That was the big
charges, which was immediately followed a few months later by the mango markets pressing charges, a very detailed and interesting, case and an indictment by DOJ, which fully understood exactly what happened. So to Heidi's point, not only can law enforcement, well, not only can you say later on that you sign an agreement under duress. So on the attacker side, like this kind of like verbal agreement that I'm not going to reach out to law enforcement means nothing really. Yeah, I'm not sure I don't think it's legally enforceable in any way for sure. And then on top of that, law enforcement may get involved regardless of this negotiation. If there was any, like, let's say there was a single US customer that was harmed by this compromise, they can swoop in. It doesn't matter if the project wants it or the attacker did something else, they can just swoop in on the case and take over it. It's just a matter of finding someone interested enough. Try to introduce the fear. We'll see how that works in a second. Yep.
So we've got intel that may identify them. Interestingly enough, don't forget, we still have contractor or dev number 5 that we still haven't heard anything from. So we're assuming that dev number 5 is our guy. And we have a bunch of different information on him. We have his ENS address. We have all the other addresses connected to that ENS address, as well as other social media handles. So we can definitely pull on those strings a little bit more to do some analysis.
So we've certainly seen in those initial messages where people outline basically like, this is what we know about you. You just so happen to interact with the centralized exchange and, use that as kind of a leverage. So the more data that, this is why the investigation side is so important. The more data you can collect on the attacker, even if you do or do not reveal it at the time of negotiation, this is your leverage that you can use to get the money back.
In one of the case studies that we actually have coming up, interestingly enough, the negotiators started the conversation with the exploiter in Chinese specifically to intimidate. Someone's asking, should we even be negotiating? Euler was intentional in starving information. That's a great question. Can you elaborate on that one more?
Yeah, sorry. So if you read the blog post, I think the founder, it's really a really great story. But I remember like the founder said that he was very intentional in not wanting to publish anything, not like tweeting. So it's kind of like, it's to make the attacker feel like, hey, what's going on, and it would kind of like cause him to make mistakes, I suppose. So that was the angle that they were going for.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's one possibility. So would you still reach out though? Or would you not even bother reaching out?
I'm not sure, to be honest. If you can have I don't know. I guess it depends on the information that you collect about the attacker. If you can kind of get a feel for his personality on what might work, then maybe that would give you a better direction on what approach to take.
Well, Euler case was really interesting, right? Because for Euler attacker, it wasn't just the Euler that reached out. It was also like the entire security community kind of like reaching out to the person, basically saying like, what are the consequences, like advising them to return the funds. So there's a lot of back and forth that you can watch on chain to encourage the return of funds.
There are lots of people talking in here about offering bounties. I think Andrew here has said that, tell them we'll give them 10%, they transfer money back to us, then immediately go for the kill and press charges for those other 10%. Sounds like.
I mean, the whole negotiation thing is tricky. Like if we call it for what it is, this is the Web3 version of ransomware. You get attacked in a traditional security, your machine is attacked, your data is held at ransom, and then you pay a ransom. Here, your money is held, and there's no reason for the attacker to return those assets. They just, for just kind of like this warm, fuzzy feeling that the project promises not to press charges, that seems naive. But again, I think one thing and we can jump into the case study, I think, but one thing to just remember when you do the negotiation, think of who is the attacker. If the attacker is someone that you know and is fully doxxed, right? If it's let's say if it's a malicious insider, then you have enough on the person to like offer kind of like, hey, we can soften the impact of what's going to happen by just like let's walk away from this so no one gets hurt too much. If it's a loan, it's a crypto native, not a criminal, just some person who's very clever, very smart, got overly excited, and you negotiate with that person, there's great likelihood they don't know how to launder funds, or they're not proficient at it, and they understand what their capabilities are. They're very good at hacking smart contracts, but they're not criminals. They may not necessarily be as proficient in laundering and opening up fake KYC identities on exchanges. Seems like a hassle. This 5, 10, 20%, 20% seems to be going right now, but seems like good enough, a pretty good life-changing amount of money to come out of this. If you're dealing with a nation state, good luck. That's not going to happen. If you're also dealing with a professional criminal group, also good luck. That negotiation is not going to really go anywhere. So it's very important, how we did the root cause analysis. Now you have to do the kind of like personality analysis, like kind of get into the psychology of who are you dealing with and craft your message appropriately.
Yeah, are you dealing with a person or group of persons? I know in the Euler case, it worked to their advantage that there were actually 3 participants who were the attackers, and one attacker was like, I don't want to negotiate, I want to keep all the funds. And then there were the other guys who were like, no, I want to be done with this, I'm out.
Yep.
And of course, that worked really in their favor, right? If you have a small team. Now, I'm curious actually here, we all know stories of funds being returned, but for all the stories of funds being returned, what do you guys think the percentages of stories of funds were not returned from negotiations? Just curious. I think it's 95. Mid-90s. So it's interesting that we're all talking about negotiation here, even though it seems like many of us think that there's an over 50% chance that ain't gonna happen. So it's something just to keep in mind.
Exactly. And the key, like we wanted to share just a few case studies, like one a success story and one not a success story. So one is a success story, so that's the recent socket compromise for $3.3 million.
That was another infinite approval one too.
Infinite approval, yeah, as always. And then we can show the negotiation that took place. So this is the one that Heidi mentioned where the outreach was immediately, they were thinking they're using the native language of the attacker based on the information they provided. This is the translation. Look at the tone and the language used. We understand you're responsible for the socket attack. We would like to discuss a bounty with you and return most of the funds to affected users. Contact us to BlockScan chat. You have 12 hours. So a couple things to note here. Very neutral. You're not accusing anyone, like pure business transaction. Very calm, like acknowledging the fact, like this happened. Some people go slightly on the other extreme, like they say, good job on, hey, white hat, good job on attacking. Sorry. You're a very good attacker, like your skills are good, or whatever. Sorry. So another thing to point out is the block scan. Sorry, losing voice.
Okay, yeah. The other thing that we can point out here is the block scan chat. So that's one way that you can start having that discussion without the public seeing. And another thing to point out as well is the time limit. Sometimes when negotiating, it helps to put a timer out there to be like, hey, attacker, you need to respond to me in 12 hours. Now, there are pros and cons to that because as someone mentioned in the chat earlier, sometimes they also need a nap, and setting that 12-hour time limit, it seems kind of pointless if you're going to go over it anyways and you're still going to negotiate with them. It seems like an empty threat, if anything. Peter, you back?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I'm getting some cold here, but so the other thing is they took this off platform, they got it on emails, and finally acknowledging that the funds were returned. So that's a standard flow. So let's look at another example. So this is the Kyber swap. So a few of you mentioned it already. That was the director. So that was a massive 48 million compromise. And the negotiation there was much more forceful. So we reached out to law enforcement. We have footprints, so very threatening. The way that it worked out beyond that is it was a complete breakdown. So the attacker came back and basically, on the next slide, demanded everything. Like, hey, I want full ownership of your company, I want to be a director, I want full records, and everything is. So this is the example, like, a lesson learned from this. Put your egos in check. This is a business transaction. It sucks, the fact that you even have to negotiate for this. But it is what it is. So be smart. Understand who you're dealing with. But attackers, they not only want to show that they can steal that money from you, they also want to show that they're the smarter person in the room. So play to their egos, validate their skill set, validate their control over your assets, and focus on your users that you need to get the money back. That's the real win. How you get there doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think this case is really interesting because it not just only broke down, but I don't know how used Kyber swap is anymore after this. So clearly, they didn't relinquish full control over Kyber, but of course, this attacker, the Kyber swap director, has all the funds of Kyber, effectively, right? And it destroys legitimacy entirely in the protocol. Now, let's move on to our second inject. Let's say we decide to write the attacker saying, hey, let's negotiate, maybe over email, contact us here. By the way, this is what I think the Euler team might have done. The reason why you wouldn't want to post that on chain is then you get a ton of different people reaching out to that one particular email. That's why we recommend, having a chat via block scan so that not as many people can actually read your message, and therefore you're not going to get inundated by a bunch of spam. So in this case, let's say we reached out and we initially hadn't heard anything back to our message. We just said, hey, we'd like to negotiate, and that's all we left on chain. The attacker actually responds with an encrypted message. This is on chain, right in the call data, and it links to a downloadable library on GitHub for an encrypted chat, and you can see here. What do you guys think this is? Are there any risks with this? Should we respond? And who do we think the attacker is here? And you guys can check out that GitHub repo. I don't know if I would download anything from it, though. Do not click the link. Yes. Do not click the link. I would agree with you. Be very careful with downloading that software. It may be malicious. Exactly. So you might want to reach out to some people who might be able to reverse engineer it to understand exactly what's going on there. Absolutely do not decrypt using the GitHub link provided. This may be malicious code which may cause further attack. Yes, do not use that. Do not. Point blank. All the money is gone.
You guys are paranoid enough. This is great. Or maybe we scared you enough by now.
It looks like, someone has a great question. Any thoughts about an attacker who might actually be attending this conference like this and learning these tactics as well? There might be a potential future attacker in the room. Absolutely. We've considered this. That's all I'll say. But yeah, that's one thing to always be paranoid about, right? You may invite people to your project. In fact, that's one reason why with our founder mode DAO, we even said, hey, wait a second, we all know one another. We all use our real quote unquote names. Someone can introduce themselves as whoever, right? You don't know if that's necessarily true. You want to verify all of that. And even if you do verify all of it, be skeptical. Be skeptical in this space. Yeah, all the money is gone. Click link.
Yellow.
Yep, be careful about the software. So someone said, why don't you click the link in a virtual machine, right? Money's gone anyways, who cares? There's a lot of other things that could be happening here. So I think actually, if I go to this case study example, I'm going to talk through the case study and we'll go back to the questions because this one's really nice. So of course we know about the Euler finance hack. Euler, oh well. So it looks like my laptop went off. Okay, so the Euler finance attackers were, I don't know where they were in their minds, but they decided to donate 100 ETH to the Ronan Bridge exploiter address. Why? Well, because they wanted to make it look like they were like DPRK, so sorry bro, funds are gone, like nothing to see here, nothing new. These were kids in reality, and they thought that they could then get away with it because everyone would be like, oh, it's DPRK, whatever. Well, funny enough, 3 days later, that address decides to respond. And that address posts this lovely message saying, hey, why don't you decrypt your address why don't you decrypt this message using a private key belonging to this address? Like, it's so obvious what's going to happen here. By the way, this attacker, this is where all the funds were sitting. So DPRK was like, sweet, bro, like, we didn't do the attack, but we'll take your money.
Well, it's a win-win. Even if it was a legit message,
Yeah.
what would they do? Like, come visit us in North Korea. One-way ticket. One-way ticket. Or we just take all your money. So regardless of the message being malicious or not, like, this is a win for TPRK.
Good PR.
Good PR. And by the way, like, when Heidi and I were watching this hack live, and when we saw that those funds flowing to a DPRK, to a Lazarus account, it's like, we know exactly what you're doing. You're not Lazarus. We know how they operate, and you're not that. Like, no matter how much you try to misdirect, we saw right through that.
That's how you know that's not a pro, by the way. Like, I immediately was like, oh, this is kids. Kids. It could be one lone wolf kid, or it could be multiple kids, but it's kids. So some people are saying to analyze the software to look for clues on who the attackers might be. That's true. That's absolutely worth your time. In this case, we kind of know who the attackers are in that case study, but yes, you might want to be doing that.
And that's the key. When you do this kind of analysis, you start building up profiles on the attacker, like what exchanges like to interact with, how do they swap, what are interesting components. We even sometimes dive into the exploit contracts themselves to look at I wonder, do they prefer to put access controls in such a way, or at what point they like to put access controls, or how exactly they interact with all the different exchangers and so on. So every little bit that the attacker does on chain is a signature on them. And once enough signatures are built up, you will start seeing patterns evolve. So that's how we classify and cluster together attackers. Laundering tactics, exploitation tactics, all of that starts kind of creating a profile.
We got some great troll questions in here. Well, now they know you're communicating, send them malware instead. Yeah, I don't know if that's in the SEAL safe harbor yet, but talk to them about that.
That's a tricky one. Again, there's a line that we cannot cross, so we cannot hack back. That's, I guess, depending what jurisdiction you're in, but from where we're standing, we just can't do the same stuff that the bad guys can do. Unfortunately or fortunately, that's the distinction between us.
Yeah, and a lot of you guys are saying, well, why don't you open up, why don't you open this up in some virtual environment or, air-gapped computer? Certainly you can do that. That's one possibility. There's one question I do want to address here is, how do we know that the attacker wouldn't do anything else after the agreement, right? We don't. And that's why you're negotiating basically on your back foot from the get-go when you even bother to open up these negotiations, right? You've already lost everything. Why should they even talk to you? And you should kind of be going into it with that expectation. And I think one thing that we usually find is that, and it's kind of what we kind of came up on here earlier, is that 9 times out of 10 negotiations do not work out. And they actually are a waste of your time because you could have been spending that time trying to track the funds and trying to stop the flow of funds so you can actually get them back. Because as we know, at least in this case study, we only reached out to the attacker after they started laundering all over the damn place, right? the funds are effectively gone, and it's going to be really annoying to try to get them back, and the attacker is not going to want to spend the time to do that unless we have some leverage on them.
Be patient. Like we're seeing that after the initial outreach to the attacker, it sometimes takes a day or days for them to reach back out to you. Maybe they realized, maybe they had like some kind of like ethical awakening, or who knows. But regardless, like be patient, that just because they don't reply immediately, they may reply in a day or so.
In the essence of time, I think we should move on. This is the end of all of the injects. Congratulations. The protocol of founder mode it still exists on chain. It's unfortunately been wrecked. And there's still a lot of cleanup to do. And we didn't have time to really talk through the cleanup yet. But we should probably have a post-mortem regarding the past 6 injects that have happened. So the actual exploit, right, exfiltration of funds, laundering, and where we currently stand.
Sure. So just on the high level, what is it that happened? What happened was, and a lot of you were digging in that direction, like, hey, like, where's that other worker? Why has he disappeared? In fact, it was a DPRK IT worker. It was a malicious insider who performed an unauthorized upgrade. They already had all the keys. It's just at some point, something flipped. They made the upgrade and started trading all the locked funds. After the initial attack, they also implemented additional functionality into the contract to also target the users. Hence why you saw there was like an alert that came shortly after the drainage that, hey, now all the users are being drained as well, all the user wallets.
Yep, the attacker then started swapping stolen funds and bridging them everywhere until then they were laundered through a Bitcoin mixer. And we didn't even get to that part because we didn't even ask where the funds were. We were just like, let's stop them, let's stop them. That is such a great, I loved your guys' reaction there, because just trying to stop the funds as fast as humanly possible is usually best, because once they start splitting them out and partitioning them, it's hell on earth to track. So the sooner you stop the flow of funds at the beginning, the better it is. Now, the team obviously then attempted to negotiate with the bad actor, but instead they received a link for malware. So let's have a quick post-mortem. What went well here? What could be improved? What's left for us to do? And I know we only have 7 minutes left here, but let's go back to Slido and go into that post-mortem section and start typing out some responses, things you think went well, what didn't go so well. To have a bit of a discussion here. But congrats for staying with us for 2 hours through this harrowing experience. Yep, someone's already written, having private key being able to perform this upgrade shouldn't have been possible. Yes. If you have been to any security discussion, I think this DevCon, one thing people say is multi-sig, multi-sigs, multi-sigs, and try to have like a multi-sig where it would have been 4 out of 5 individuals. So in that case, even if we did have that one malicious dev, that they wouldn't have been able to deploy the upgrade unless they had 3 other people that they had pulled the wool over their eyes of.
Right, it's hard to do when your entire team is 5 people, but even with 5 people, you cannot have a single point of failure. You can't have a single person that either mistakenly or, like, don't even think about malicious insider. Just think that someone may have gotten compromised on your team. A single compromised dev box should not result in your entire protocol getting drained.
People say rip FUMO. That's a big one, actually. So the entirety of Mode Chain is basically toxic now, right? No one's on it anymore. There are no more projects building on there. Basically, that entire ecosystem's wrecked based on, you know, what our project was, right? It's something to really consider your position, right, and the risks that your protocol has on the space, as well as other protocols have maybe on you and your protocol.
Don't hire anonymous contractors. Like, even the contractor was actually not anonymous, right? We mentioned that all 5 people in the very beginning, all 5 people have their names. It's just that what are your practices to verify? What kind of background checks do you actually do to verify that the person saying who they are really is that person? Like for smaller teams, it's very hard to do. Like we don't have the same capability. Well, we have to build quickly. And we meet a person at Defcon at conference and like, hey, let's build something together. We get all excited, but either they were an intentional plant with fake identity, or it could be that someone just goes rogue because something happened.
I would say because of that, again, you want to partition out ownership. You never want one person to be the owner of, for example, everything in your AWS cloud. You do not want that. You want there to be multiple people who have access to things, right? You want to partition out keys as best as possible. That's one way to prevent this kind of stuff. Sure, it slows you down from deploying things, upgrading things, but at the same time, it will prevent any sort of instance like this from happening. At least you'll have one check in place.
I'm seeing a lot of stuff about pre-exploit, just like the top question, like ability to upgrade. What I'm not seeing is, are thoughts about what happens after the hack, the incident response process, the sleuthing and chain tracing. There's a lot of stuff like, hey, hacks can happen to anyone. It's what we do after the hack happened, how quickly we react to it. Knowing, like one thing we could point out, I wish we knew exactly what levers we can pull in the protocol. So someone said, can we pause? Like that was a perfect example. Like knowing what are those levers that we can pull to quickly start moving funds, which may be a risk, quickly. That's the matter of, are you losing just a few $1 million or you're wrecking your whole protocol? So preparation in terms of incident response, when the incident does happen, preparation in terms of fast reaction, how to start a war room, with who and what are the participants and what are the responsibilities in the war room. Shaving up those minutes means a completely different outcome for how the hack is going to go.
Some people were also saying, like, we need to actually have done more online sleuthing. And I highly agree with this. A lot of times when you're in a war room, the sleuthing is mainly happening on the smart contract, right? Seeing how exactly the exploit occurred and trying to patch it. At the same time, though, you need to also have people looking into who actually deployed this contract? What were they previously doing? Did they leave any other interesting tidbits behind? There's a lot of information you can actually glean out of that. You can see if they also might have deployed other similar contracts on mainnets or other L2s. And we also had the internal information too about this dev not responding to anything. But of course, we had their quote unquote real name, right? We had their email. We had all of their different handles. We could have been doing a lot with that. So don't let that OSINT information scare you. Use that to your advantage. And just, I mean, all of you guys know how to look up things on the internet. I'm not concerned about that here. Just use that to your advantage and start digging.
The stats on malicious, the stats on funds recovery for malicious insider are actually good. Knowing who actually perpetrated it and leveraging that against them to be able to return funds, that's a reasonable approach towards things. So,
someone said require North Korean attestation prior to hiring. It's funny, for those of you that attended the DeFi Security Summit, I think a lot of us have talked about that. The problem is the concern here is that eventually even DPRK is going to be like, yeah, I hate Kim Jong-un. Right? Like, they're just going to say it. There are a lot of other ways of getting around this. Like, even if you turn on the cameras, even if you require real names, there are lots of ways DPRK will get around this, right? They can hire body doubles, so to speak. They can do all sorts of stuff like have fake KYC documents prepared. Instead, again, partition out key access. That's the main way that you are going to protect yourself. Don't trust anyone, basically, even if they're your BFF. Online. Cool. It looks like our time's up here today. We want to do a Q&A, but hope you guys had a lot of fun and chat with us in the hallway.
And most importantly, take these lessons home today and start thinking, what is it that you will change in your product, in your protocol, to respond to the things that we covered today. That's the biggest takeaway. That's your homework.
That's it. Easy.